Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our second panel of the day. This is our Implementing Emerging Technologies with Citywide Initiatives panel. We have two guest panelists with the City of Arlington. We have Alicia Winkelblech, who is the Senior Officer of Strategic Initiatives, and we also have Dr. Ann Foss, a principal planner with the City of Arlington, who are going to be sharing with us some of the exciting things that they have going on in their community. So I hope everyone enjoys the presentation. Thank you.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you to the Film Commission for inviting us to speak. We have what we think are lots of exciting and fun things going on in the City of Arlington, and we love to talk about them and share information with others about what we're doing. So as Lindsay said, my name is Alicia Winkelblech, and I manage our Office of Strategic Initiatives in the City of Arlington. We cover a wide range of topics in OSI, everything from federal grant management to research and analytics to neighborhood planning and long range city planning. But one of the most interesting areas I think that we get to work on is transportation innovation and mobility innovation. So we're excited to share with you guys a little bit about what we've been working on the past few years. And hopefully you can, gain some insight into how cities can work in this space to create a positive impact, both near term and long term, for our communities, our residents, visitors, and then also just, having a positive impact on the transportation innovation industry in general. Let's see here. Get my first slide going here. So for those of you that are not familiar, I just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of information about the City of Arlington. So we are the 50th largest city in the nation. We are nearly 400,000 people spread over 99 square miles. We are located just south of DFW International Airport, right kind of smack in the middle of the city of Fort Worth and the city of Dallas in North Texas. We have a lot of interesting activities going on here. We have a super active entertainment district that is home to the Dallas Cowboys, the Texas Rangers. We have Six Flags Over Texas, Hurricane Harbor, a Texas Live entertainment district. So a lot of activity going on kind of in the northern portion of our city. And then in the center part of our city, we have the University of Texas at Arlington, which is one of the major Texas universities. We're lucky enough to have it right next to our downtown. So we're able to feed off the energy of the university to really kind of develop and redevelop in recent years our downtown. So a lot of different things going on here. We do have a fairly suburban land use pattern, which is just kind of an important thing to keep in mind as we talk about some of our transportation innovation. Because of our land use pattern and the way Arlington developed, we are not necessarily set up in a way that lends itself to easy use of traditional public transit solutions. So bus systems, rail systems, we are, not a high density city. We're fairly spread out. A traditional bus system, for that to work in our city, would be expensive to be able to provide access to everyone we'd like to provide access to. So just a little bit of background that I'll go into more in a little while, and kind of how we ended up where we are today. So we're excited to be known now as a leader in innovation. It has not always been that way for Arlington. In fact, at one point in time, we were the largest city in the nation without a public transit system. So in recent years, we've worked very hard to create an environment where we can nurture innovation, and we can be open and inviting to companies and vendors who want to come and test innovation in our city and try out different transportation solutions. And we think that's really important. We think it's important for us as a city to be prepared for the future. We think it's important for our residents and visitors to get the opportunity to test out, try out, become comfortable with different transportation solutions. It's just something that our leadership has made a priority. Let's switch here. So, as I said, we historically have not been super innovative in the transportation space. Arlington has, in the past, chosen not to invest in traditional public transit for some of those reasons I listed in terms of, not being dense, maybe not having the demand. But we also had a residential population for a long time that, at least the outspoken part of the population, was against any kind of becoming a member of a transit authority or providing buses or rail in the city. We had actually historically have gone to the voters 3 different times asking the question, would you like to use a portion of your sales tax to allow the city to become a member of a transit authority and provide a rail station or a bus system in the city? And 3 different times the answer was no. The most recent being in 2002. So it's been quite some time. But as a result, I guess maybe kind of a happy result of the circumstance, because we have not historically invested in traditional transit, we find ourselves in a unique position that we are able to take advantage of new innovative solutions. So we don't have a lot of public transit infrastructure in place. We don't have any kind of financial commitment to pass traditional infrastructure. So we really are in a position to be a leader and be innovative on new solutions and really kind of test things out in a real world setting. And as I mentioned, get our community comfortable with what's available in transportation these days. Transportation is a very, very different topic and industry than it was, even 20 years ago. It's changing so quickly that it's hard even for us to keep up. Let's see here. So I wanted to frame and kind of lead you up to how we got to where we are today. So I mentioned that we had never had public transit. The last election was in 2002. By around, 2015, 2016, our current mayor and council at that time recognized that there was absolutely a need and a demand in the city. It was undeniable. There may still be a lot of people who were not supportive, but the demand was there. And if we were going to compete as, nationally and internationally as a global city, it was an area that we really needed to step into and advance what we were doing. They weren't ready to go back to the public asking for the use of sales tax again, a 4th time. And instead they decided to be more strategic and thoughtful about it. And so far it's worked out really well for us. So back in 2016, they created a transportation advisory committee, which was made up of citizens and some key stakeholders in the city. We had about 31 people on the committee. And they spent about a year listening to different industry experts, studying documents and numbers and analysis that staff provided them. And they were tasked with developing a multimodal framework to guide future transportation decisions for the city. It wasn't a near-term thing necessarily. It was, let's look out 10, 20, 30 years and make sure that there's some guidelines and a framework that set us up for success. They were careful not to create too much detail that would lock us in. As I mentioned, transportation is changing so fast, and there are innovative solutions that are showing up and will show up that we aren't even anticipating yet. So they didn't want to create a document or a strategy that locked us into what 10 years from now would be an outdated transit solution. So instead, they focused on some key tenets. They wanted to make sure that we had a comprehensive and systemic approach, that we could cover the entire city, all the residents of the city, and that it worked as a system. It wasn't, one piece here, one piece here, that it was actually streamlined and efficient. They wanted to make sure the system was flexible in terms of immediate needs and long-term needs. Cost effectiveness, obviously, is always important to a city. One of the interesting pieces of information that they were dealing with is if we, as the City of Arlington, went and tried to join a transit authority in our region. We actually have 3 transit authorities in North Texas, all with different requirements for becoming a member city. But at a minimum, that was probably going to cost the city around $30 million per year. And we'll talk in a little while about our VIA solution, but we've been able to do that for about $8.5 million a year. So in terms of using innovation to create really unique, cost-effective solutions, we feel like we've been able to find a great example of that. It was important that we made sure we were equitable and serving all populations, and that the solutions could be phased in. We knew that anything that the city wanted to implement couldn't be done all at once, would need to be done over the long term. So they went through that analysis, had lots and lots of meetings and discussions, and did some really great work. And they came up with a framework that had a variety of mobility solutions. And you can see in the map there, just a quick look. One of the primary solutions that really was unanimous across the committee was the need for demand response rideshare. So we'll talk about more about that in a moment, but that was really kind of seen as the first step and something that was needed as a citywide solution. So you kind of have this base citywide network of rideshare, and then you lay on top of that those colored corridors with a variety of solutions as demand shows up. We're not ready to do those yet, but over time, we think that we will probably have some automated elevated transit in key corridors, maybe some bus rapid transit or high intensity bus along a couple of the main freeway corridors that connect Fort Worth and Dallas, and potentially even some high speed rail solutions in that yellow number 4 corridor. So a variety of solutions, but really clear direction on where to start, which was the on-demand rideshare. So I will take that segue to introduce you guys. On-demand rideshare was one of the key things that I'll be talking about today, and I'll talk about some even cooler stuff with our autonomous vehicles. But so as I said, that initial suggestion that was unanimous from the committee and supported by council was for us to go out and create an on-demand rideshare system. And so because of Arlington's past, with the lack of public transit and the size of our city, coupled with this innovative approach to public transit, we immediately received a lot of national attention. Our mayor got a slot on the national CBS this morning. It was really exciting to see that we were doing something innovative enough that it was catching everybody's attention. And not only the media, that kind of started what has now been 4.5 years of city transit authorities across the nation, a few globally, reaching out to us and wanting to understand what we're doing, how it works, how we're funding it, how we got to where we are. And so that is, for somebody like myself and Anne, who spend a lot of time working on this stuff in a municipal government setting, something like that's really exciting because it makes us feel like we have landed on something that not only can help our city, the City of Arlington, but has the potential to help a lot of other cities and a lot of people across the nation. There are a lot of cities that are like Arlington. They're more suburban or rural in nature. They don't have the density to support traditional public transit, but they have individuals that need a solution other than a personal vehicle. And so being able to work on something like this that can potentially provide that solution to those in need for, in a fairly cost-effective way is something that we've really kind of enjoyed as some of the fruits of our labor. Oops, hold on here. I'm chasing a little arrow to move my next slide. There we go. So VIA is a public-private partnership. So not only is it a unique approach to public transit, but we're a a little bit unique in the way that we chose to implement it. The city wanted a turnkey solution. So we did not want a situation where we owned vehicles or we had city employees who were driving vehicles anything like that. So we went out looking for a private vendor who could give us a turnkey solution, meaning they provided the drivers, the vehicles, the technology platform, the customer service. I mean, really the whole thing, everything it takes to run an on-demand service. We were the first city in the nation to use rideshare as our public transit solution. So that was some of that kind of national attention we got. People historically just hadn't used it this way. Uber and Lyft existed, but they didn't necessarily have rideshare components, and they certainly weren't something that a city was employing as a public transit solution at that time. We also have a unique funding stream. So as with all public transit, our VIA service is subsidized, just like rail and other transportation. But we were able to bring in some federal Transit Administration funding, 5307 funds, which FTA had never funded rideshare before. They typically would fund bus and rail. So we were able to work with our local FTA office and help them understand what we were doing and our intentions, and we're able to use that FTA funding to cover a portion of our costs. So today we've got around $3 million of FTA funding on an $8.5 million project. So it really is a huge chunk of how we fund our service, which helps the city afford it and helps us keep it cost effective for the riders. 100% of our service revenue, so the fare box, goes back into the service. We're not collecting that separately. As I mentioned, we have a comprehensive customer service component that is really important, and we've learned in running these services, from typical questions about how the service works to the issues that you run into when you public transit service, when things don't go quite right or aren't meeting somebody's needs. That was a really important component that we, in hindsight, are very glad we have as part of the turnkey solution. That's not something that the city would have been able to staff up and handle in a cost-effective way. So it's turning out to be a really great way to approach that as well as part of the overall turnkey solution. And then data sharing is another unique piece that our current vendor VIA was completely on board with and was really important to us. We wanted them to share all of the data with us, and we asked them to do a lot of analysis for us, but because they share the data with us, we're able to do a lot of our own analysis to help us make sure that we're providing a high quality service and hitting all of our goals and objectives. But that data also helps us plan for the future in our city. So that was of this type of relationship that we were able to set. So a little bit just kind of about the basics of VIA and how it works. VIA is an on-demand rideshare system. It's smartphone based. So if you've ever taken a ride in a ride with a ride hailing service, it's very similar to that. You download the app, you enter your credit card, set up your account, and then you're ready to take rides. And whenever you want to take a ride, you tell it where you are, tell it where you want to go. It offers you, one or two ride options. It may say we can pick you up in 5 minutes or we can pick you up in 18 minutes. Shows you a map and gives you walking directions and tells you where it will pick you up and where it will drop you off. You can watch your van. You've got a picture of some vans that seat 6 passengers to run the service. You can watch a map of your van approaching, see when it's getting close. They give you a 2-minute warning when it's time for you to walk out to the street, and they pick you up and take you on your way. It is shared rides, which allows us to make it more cost effective. So the service will divert in a minimal manner, somebody up who's kind of along the way as you to your destination. Which doesn't really impact the time in the van that much, but it really does allow cost-effective solution. It's a very flexible and scalable approach. So we are very easily able to match our capacity, the number of vehicles and drivers on the road, with the demand. And when demand goes up, we can add more vehicles, and when demand goes down, take them off the road. It is model contract drivers. So They are not V employees, which means we have a little bit more ebb and flow in our ability to kind of bring drivers on or not have drivers driving with VIA that day. And most of those drivers are maybe driving for another service or have another job as well. So it's kind of nicely. Community enjoys this a personalized solution. So unlike a traditional bus or rail system where you're on a very specific schedule and you have to wait 30 minutes for the bus or catch the bus right at 2:00, you can use this system and service to go where you want, when you want. So very personalized in that way. And it's fully dynamic. So it does not have set routes. It doesn't have set go from City Hall up to the rail station that we have just outside our city limits, which we connect to. If I go there 5 days a week, I may go 3 different ways. And their back-end technology platform has very advanced algorithms that are using to-the-minute data to decide the most efficient way to get you where you need to go. So it's taking into account traffic data, construction on roadways, who else booked it, all of those factors are combined and used to give you efficient and fast as of a trip as possible. So I mentioned earlier when our advisory committee created the framework, they were very focused on the ability to phase in implementation. And part of that was to implement at a pace forward, implement that our citizens and residents could absorb. So not throwing a citywide system all at once really well. So we started out small and success. And as we found success, we would expand a little bit and then expand a little bit more. So you can see here kind of this very incremental approach. We started in the center of our city around the downtown and university area in our entertainment district. And we've always connected to that Centerport TRE in the upper portion of the map. That is a rail line or a rail station that is on a commuter rail line that connects Fort Worth to Dallas. And so we have a lot of people who use VIA to come into the city. They come to the Centerport station and then grab a VIA and come in and go to school or work. So we started in the center of the city, worked our way out. And then when COVID hit, the city was the recipient of a fair amount of CARES funding. And we're able to use that funding to go ahead and jump from our 40% of the city being covered to 100% being covered, covering all 99 square miles. So throughout this entire map of the city here, everyone can get a ride by walking just 1 to 2 blocks and get dropped off within 1 to 2 blocks of their destination. As I mentioned, there's no fixed schedules or routes. You go when you want. We don't run service on Sundays. It's definitely something we're exploring as an option in the future. Trips are pretty cost effective. Any trip that is connecting to the Centerport TRE station has a flat rate of $3, no matter how long the distance is, because we also do a lot with our nonprofit community and offer vouchers for reduced fares or free rides so that we can make sure we're tapping into those who need the service the most.
Right. Sorry about the technological issues. We're several years, couple years now into COVID and still grappling with technology changes. But I'll just hop in and finish up talking about VIA. Hopefully we can get Alicia reconnected shortly, and then we'll switch over to talk about our autonomous vehicle program in just a moment. Let's see. So I think Alicia was talking about some of our performance so far on VIA. We're really close to hitting 1 million rides total on the service, which we plan to hit, I think, sometime this weekend. And we'll be celebrating that large milestone. We have over 100,000 unique accounts that have been set up on the service. So those are people who have downloaded the app, set up an account, and are ready to take a ride. One of the great things that VIA does is able to ask for rider feedback kind of real time after each ride. So we get great rider feedback scores, and those have averaged at 96% satisfaction rate. So people overall are really happy with the service. And then I know Alicia mentioned earlier the importance of data sharing. We get a lot of real-time data and analytics from VIA so that we can carefully monitor the service and make decisions about how to adjust or improve or shift service as necessary to make sure that we're really serving people with their needs. All right. So just a final note, Alicia's been kind of stressing the fact that this service is very flexible and we can customize it to be what we need it to be. So one of the great examples of that is how we were able to respond to COVID. Obviously, transportation services across the nation and world were hit pretty hard by COVID and stay-at-home orders. We too saw ridership decline pretty significantly in the spring of 2020. But we were able to implement a number of safety measures very quickly. So we installed some barriers between the driver and rider compartments. We limited capacity in each van to allow people to spread out more. We've complied with FTA requirements for wearing masks for all riders and drivers. We also added more frequent cleaning and sanitizing of the vehicles. And then we have the ability to offer kind of reminders through the app to check your symptoms, not ride if you're not feeling well, things like that. So all of those enabled us to be able to continue the service, for the folks who still needed it, and help people feel comfortable using that. And then we saw service and ridership come back quite quickly in the summer of 2020. And so we have been steadily climbing since then. But another key benefit to the city was the cost savings element of that. When ridership was quite low, we were able to scale back the number of vehicles and drivers on the road, and then gradually add more capacity again as ridership returned. And that allowed the city to save money, which was very key during some of the financial crunch time early in COVID. All right. It looks like Alicia is back, which is great. Do you have anything else you want to add, or should we switch gears to autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, go on to your part.
Okay.
That sounds great.
Okay, great. So we'll switch gears a little bit and talk about the city's autonomous vehicle services that we have offered. So we, again, started thinking about autonomous vehicles as part of this Transportation Advisory Committee process that Alicia talked about at the top of the presentation as a possible solution for Arlington's kind of unique conditions and needs for transportation. All along, we've had kind of two main overarching goals that we have focused on. One is testing AV technology in real world settings. So really understanding how the technology, the different vehicle platforms, the different approaches work in the real world, not necessarily in a controlled environment. And then our second is educating our citizens and visitors about AV technology. We expect that this type of technology will become more and more prevalent. And our hope is that if people are familiar with it, they have the opportunity to come out, ride a vehicle, ask questions, kind of kick the tires, so to speak. They'll feel more comfortable with the technology and more accepting of it as we move into the future. And then kind of a third goal, which has also been rewarding, is really that we've established Arlington as a national autonomous vehicle leader through the successive phases that we've had. So our first AV pilot was called Milo, which was a play on the idea of mile zero, or getting people to their final destination. This was an off-street service that we operated in our entertainment district. It used an existing network of pedestrian and bicycle trails that we had in place, and it connected some of the remote parking lots to the entertainment destinations, the big stadiums. So we leased two Easy Mile EZ10 Gen 1 vehicles, and there's a photo of the vehicle there. It is a fully electric low-speed shuttle. It also had a wheelchair ramp that deployed with a push of a button. So it was a really appealing vehicle platform for us to test out. It could hold up to 12 passengers at a time. It was fairly low speed, so we averaged around 6 to 8 miles per hour on our particular route. And we always had a human operator on board. And I was actually one of those trained operators. So I logged a number of hours in this vehicle out on the route. We did contract with First Transit to provide operations for all the major events at the stadiums. But then we had city staff trained to operate for public demos as well as special group tours. So all told, we operated Milo for 1 year, from August of 2017 through August of 2018. And we operated at over 110 different events. So we were able to get a lot of experience and a lot of good feedback. We did have a ridership survey, and we found that the vast majority of riders felt comfortable, felt safe, and were supportive of AV technology more broadly. So that was very important for us, to get that type of feedback and kind of community support for moving forward with AV testing. We also learned a lot about the deployment environment, the type of structures or lack of buildings, the type of terrain that you're moving around in, the type of people who will be riding and their needs are really important when picking out a vehicle and a vendor. So that was also very useful information for us. Two of the kind of only slightly more negative complaints that we had from riders is that the vehicles were warm. The air conditioning system on board was not always equal to the task of keeping up with Texas summer heat, and that the ride was fairly slow. So we took all of that feedback and rolled that into our next phase of AV testing, which was an on-road pilot that we did. It started in October of 2018. It ran through the end of May 2019. So for this one, we partnered with a company called Drive AI, and they provided more of a turnkey solution than our first pilot. So I did not have to learn how to drive these vehicles or spend time in them. Definitely rode a lot, which was a lot of fun. But we had Drive AI staff who took care of all of the maintenance and operations and other needs of the vehicles. We also used a very different type of vehicle. We used a Nissan NV200 minivan, which Drive AI retrofitted with all of the autonomous vehicle sensors and technology necessary to drive autonomously. Because we were using an auto grade platform, we were able to operate on street legally. And so we operated kind of doing a circulator loop around our entertainment district, serving not only the stadium venues, but also some office buildings, our convention center, some restaurants. So a little bit more of a varied group of folks would ride. And it was a more regular service, kind of a set schedule Monday through Friday, as opposed to a special event service. We didn't have complaints again. Riders were very happy with this service. The vehicles did go faster. The routes were a little bit more efficient. So this was a great opportunity for us to learn more about the on-street deployment. We did end this deployment earlier than we expected. Drive AI was acquired by Apple, and then they shut down their operational arm, but we were still able to learn quite a lot and serve 755 trips total over the life of this service. And so then we pivoted into our third phase, which we had envisioned. We kind of did off-street, then we did on-street, and then our third phase was to integrate autonomous vehicles into our existing public transit system with VIA. So we applied for federal grant funding, and we're very honored and appreciative to receive a grant from the FTA Integrated Mobility Innovation Program. So we received $1.7 million, as well as in-kind contributions from our partners. So it's a $2.8 million project total for a 1-year deployment, and we're partnering with VIA. They provide our existing service, and this is integrated into. We're partnering with May Mobility, who provides the autonomous vehicles, and then we're partnering also with the University of Texas at Arlington. We operate on and around their campus, and faculty and staff on campus are also doing a lot of research and evaluation. So we're getting a lot of great data analysis with this service. So we believe that this is the first on-demand autonomous vehicle service that's been fully integrated into existing public transportation in the US. So what we've done is we've integrated a fleet of 5 May Mobility vehicles onto the VIA platform. So basically, you book a ride using the VIA app, or you can call into a local phone number for folks that don't have a smartphone app. And if the parameters of your ride fit the AV service, you'll be offered a standard VIA van as well as the autonomous vehicle. So everyone can always opt into this service if they want to. We do have 1 wheelchair accessible vehicle in the fleet, and we're operating for 1 year. We started last March, so we're finishing up in just over a month now. So this project is nearing the end, but we do have some future phases that we're thinking about as well. One of the other things we're using some of our funding for is free rides for University of Texas at Arlington students. And so this has been a great service for a lot of our students who live on or near campus to have improved mobility around the area. So we do have some broad objectives with this service, really demonstrating how the combination of AV technology and ride sharing technology works. And we're also really focused on improving accessibility and equity in transportation. The service area that we operate in has a lot of lower income populations. The car ownership rate is much lower in our service area than for the broader city. So we're focused on that equity piece as well. And then also obviously safety and efficiency are huge concerns and top of mind with any public transportation service. So those are metrics that we're tracking carefully here too. So, kind of nuts and bolts of the service, the map here shows our service area, which is, like I said, the UTA campus, as well as the core of our downtown, which is really the civic and cultural center here in Arlington. And then we operate Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. We originally started at 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., but found much stronger demand later in the day. So we were able to shift those service hours again, kind of appreciating our partners and their ability to be flexible and change the service to really meet the needs of our riders. And I think the next slide kind of gets into a little bit more of our performance so far. And I want to make sure that I share some of these details before we shift over in just a couple of moments to Q&A. So we have taken over 23,000 rides on the service in about the 11 months or so that we have been operational. And the ridership chart here shows our daily average rides by week. So when we launched the service, the first month or two, we were averaging around 35 rides per day. This was last spring. Campus was still operating mostly remote as opposed to in person. So we didn't have quite as much demand, but we marketed the service, promoted it. And then over the summer of last year, and certainly into the start of the fall semester in August, when campus returned to in-person operations, we saw ridership climbing very steadily. We reached a peak in early November of averaging close to 200 rides per day. And then as expected, we did see a dip into December and the holiday season, which is pretty traditional. So that's that one little low bar there at the end of December, but then we've climbed back out of that quite rapidly and are getting back close to our average high ridership. Some of the other performance metrics that we track carefully are ETAs, the wait time before your vehicle arrives. Again, it is an on-demand service, so we want that to be available for folks. We average between 10 and 15 minutes of wait time. Our on-time percentage is quite high, 99 to 100% on average. And then we also look at AV acceptance rates. As I mentioned, when someone books a ride, they get the option between a standard VIA van and the autonomous vehicle. And they're able to compare cost and wait time. So there's a couple different things that might influence their decision. When we first launched, we were seeing acceptance rates, people choosing that AV ride around 50% of the time. Now we're up to 70 to 75% of the time people are choosing the AVs. So we're seeing that hopefully people are more comfortable with them, more accepting of them, and choosing to use that on a more regular basis. We also do shared rides similar to our broader VIA service. The vehicles that we're using can carry up to 3 passengers at a time. When we launched in the middle of COVID, we did limit it to just 1 booking at a time. But as vaccination rates have increased, we did open that up to shared bookings. And so we see that rides are shared kind of between 50 and 70% of the time. So it's making transportation more efficient, which is wonderful. And then the graphic at the bottom of the slide here is a snapshot of some of our autonomy maps. So we have a very complex urban environment that these vehicles are operating in. They're on streets, they're dealing with pedestrians, bicyclists, delivery trucks, folks double parked, all kinds of things going on. But we are averaging over 80% of the time throughout this service area, the vehicles are able to operate fully autonomously. And that has improved over time as the vehicles have learned the area and kind of gotten better at anticipating what's happening. So you can see a snapshot of our route shown on the left-hand side where we started, and the yellows to blues are lower autonomy, and then the oranges to reds are higher autonomy. You can see as we've progressed over the deployment, much higher rates of autonomy that we're seeing across the service. And it's allowed our May Mobility partners to learn a lot as we have gone through this as well about how their technology works in a complex environment. So I think that concludes our slides, and we've got some time left for questions, which we're excited to dive into. I'll close down the slides so you can see us a little bit better.
And we've got one, maybe I'll read it and you can answer it because I think it's for you.
All right.
So the question says, how do you mitigate safety concerns with residents wanting to take advantage of these autonomous services?
Yeah, that's a great question, and certainly something that's top of mind for everybody with this new technology. So, safety is the number one priority for the city and all of our partners. And there's a number of different safety measures that we have in place. We do have a trained operator behind the wheel. And then, that's a great opportunity for folks who ride in the vehicles to be able to ask questions, learn more about the technology, still have a human on board to help them feel a little bit more comfortable. The vehicles are also very visible as autonomous vehicles. So even if you're not riding in one, if you're driving around it, there are signs that say self-driving vehicle. They've got, the technology on the roof and kind of around them. So they do stand out as something a little bit different. But I think, the safety is built into the system. So, these vehicles don't tailgate, they come to full stops at all intersections, they don't speed. So I think other drivers on the road can recognize that they're driving safely and don't pose a risk there. But really it's education and exposure we think is the best way to help people feel more comfortable.
Okay, we've got another question. Are customers using the service for daily commuting purposes or more for individual transportation reasons? I don't know if that's specific to our autonomous vehicle service or VIA. I can speak to VIA and then let Ann talk about the AVs. For VIA, I think we have a mix. We do have a lot of, so I mentioned data was really important to the city, and that we get a lot of data from VIA broken down in many different ways. So one of the things we can look at is how many trips an individual rider is taking and how often they're taking those. So we can surmise when we think someone is commuting to and from work or to and from school every day. But then we have a lot of that. But we also see a lot of one-off trips where somebody just takes a ride once every couple of weeks or once a week or once a month. I mean, I think there's really a broad range of how often people use the service and where they go. So I think we have a really nice mix of people who are commuting versus people who are going to grab lunch versus somebody who's going to Walmart to get groceries. So we've actually enjoyed seeing the service be used in a variety of ways.
And then for the rapid service, I think we have also a mix with our riders there. We definitely have folks who ride it maybe once or twice. They want to try out the AV service and see what it's like. But then we do have a large group of folks that ride it on a regular basis. So they may be getting to and from school or work. We do have some survey data that helps give us a little bit more insight for at least the folks that respond to the survey. And it's pretty well distributed across the uses. So people are using it to get to school, get to work, get to shopping and other entertainment type reasons. So it's pretty varied overall. And then the next question, are the drivers considered city employees? Alicia, do you want to cover that for the VIA service?
Sure. No, they aren't for VIA. So we have a turnkey service. VIA provides everything for us, and the drivers are actually not even VIA employees. They're contract drivers that VIA hires that can sign up to drive when they want for how long they want. But that's the model that VIA very purposefully is created around.
And then it's a little different for the autonomous vehicles. There's a lot of training that goes into being an operator for the AVs. And so those operators are May Mobility employees, and May Mobility trains them and provides a lot of kind of resources and support for them, but they are also not city employees.
Let's see, our next question. What kinds of users were you targeting to utilize this service? And are they actually the ones using it now? For VIA, I think we were really targeting all populations. It was really important to us that we had an equitable service that anyone in any part of the city could use, anyone at any income level could use, and anyone with any level of disability could use just as easy as someone who did not have that disability. So I do think it's important for us that our lower income residents are aware of the service and able to access it and use it in a way that works for them. They maybe have a little bit more of a barrier sometimes to using it because they may not have a smartphone or may not have some of the resources that others have. So we've been very careful to try to craft a service that can be used by everyone.
And for the AV program, I think with our earlier pilots, they were targeted to folks visiting the entertainment district or working in the entertainment district. And that is generally who we saw riding. With our current service, we were expecting a lot of university students, and that is a large portion of our riders. But then I think we do also have folks who live or work in downtown who are using the AVs as well. But definitely, our AV services have always been open to the general public to try to get as wide a range as folks out to try them. All right, here's our next to last question, I think. How long do the transportation partnerships typically take to set up from idea to implementation? That's a great question. We like to move quickly here in Arlington. So our timelines are usually very fast, and I don't know that I would always recommend that for everyone, but I'll just briefly talk about some of our AV deployments, and then Alicia talk about the VIA. With our first AV deployment, Milo, we got that up and going in about 6 months, which was really challenging, kind of from time when we decided we wanted to do it. We had a contract before our city council about a month later. We had the vehicles here 2 months after that, and then spent 3 months really kind of testing and programming and training and getting all the nuts and bolts figured out. With the rapid service, we had about a year of lead time built into our grant to prepare everything and then launch the service.
And then on the VIA side, we issued the RFP in August, I believe, and then we had the service up and running in December, which I agree. I do not recommend that. That's crazy fast. I think one of the reasons we were able to do it is because we were starting in a very small area. So, we've got 68 vehicles now. We started with just a very, very small group of vehicles. However, I will say with something like a rideshare service, there's no infrastructure. There's nothing to build. There's nothing to construct. So once you get your contract in place and the pieces, your technology platform, your vehicles, your drivers, you turn it on. And that's really, I showed earlier all of the expansions we've done, and it feels like you would need to do a lot more to, at least on the city side, to expand, in these increments, but you kind of turn it on. They've got to get the vehicles and drivers ready, and we absolutely do a lot of kind of marketing to make sure, and outreach to make sure people are aware of it. But then it's really very easy to just put more drivers on the road, and the people demand the rides, and they go pick them up. I think we've got one last question. Can you share more about private and public sector funding sources for communities seeking to implement private-public transportation partnerships? Yes. So as I mentioned earlier, we have the ability to access Federal Transit Administration funding. It's 5307 funds specifically, which we get in our region kind of based on formula. Our Council of Governments looks at all of the entities providing public transit in the region and their ridership and their impact on the community, and then kind of delves up the formula funds. So that is definitely a place to look. We've had great success there. We've had great support from our regional FTA office. In fact, while it's very much outside of the box of what FTA would say they funded when we started this back in 2017, they've always been really excited about it and really supportive. So I think I would advise that if there is federal funding that seems like it might be hard to use, I would definitely have those conversations and go and explain what you're trying to do. I think, at the end of the day, if you're trying to do the same things that they're trying to do, often you can kind of find a pathway there. It is complex, and there's a lot of gray area in the regulations because they don't necessarily specifically call out rideshare service, for example. So sometimes you aren't exactly sure how a regulation applies to you or if it applies, but it's definitely worth looking into. We use general fund money to round out most of the balance of the cost of our service. You could certainly go and use something like sales tax if you're a community that had that and your community wanted to use it that way. Our fares, which don't cover the service, but they do put a decent amount of money into the service. Our estimated cost on kind of an $8.5 million price tag for the city, we've got roughly $1 million in fares coming in that goes on top of that. So it's really kind of a $9.5 million service, but fares are a piece of that. And then we've had great success with VIA. They've been very creative and helpful to us in going out and working with the private sector. So we've got, for example, auto dealerships. So you go drop off your car, you need a ride home or a ride to the office. Instead of these auto dealerships employing people and taking one of their cars out to take you to the office, they now are using VIA, and they're actually paying a little bit of an increased price per trip. We give them our VIA gives them a booking tool where they can have a little bit more control over it, and they're willing to pay a little bit of a premium for that. And we're able to VIA can take that money and donate it back to the city as credits, which reduces our cost a little bit too. So I think you can get really creative. You just got to be willing to have the conversations and ask the questions.
And I would just chime in quickly too that, there's a lot of competitive grants that are out there, and sometimes it can be overwhelming to put those grant applications together. But we have, we submitted several applications before we got our current FTA grant for our AV service. And I think, that's helpful. You go through that process, you kind of practice writing those applications, you can get feedback from the granting agencies on if you aren't awarded, they're happy to share kind of areas that they would have wanted to see in your application. And I would definitely recommend establishing partnerships with the folks that you think you may want to work with in the future. VIA and May Mobility and UTA helped us write our application. And so we kind of had that relationship already established. We were ready to hit the ground running when we were awarded the funding. And there's a lot of grant funding coming out through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, as I'm sure many of you are aware. But there's some great opportunities there for small projects as well as larger projects too.
And it looks like we actually have one actual final question because we're almost out of time, I know. Have you included or considered advertising options within the vehicles or on the vehicles to help offset the cost? Great question. And actually, we should have mentioned that. Yes, we did not do that on the VIA vehicles. We didn't do that originally, but we added that in maybe a year and a half ago. We have digital screens on top of most of the vehicles. We have tablets inside the vehicles, both of which have advertising opportunities that VIA has been able to go and secure some great contracts to bring some additional funding into the service. That's worked well for us. And so we're hoping just to grow that and help offset this cost even more.
Thank you. Thank you all both for joining us today. Thank you to our attendees for tuning in, and If any of our attendees want to continue the conversation, pop into the networking lounge. I believe that this conversation can be continued in the workforce development chat. And we have one more final panel at 1 o'clock, building a more inclusive future. So we hope to see you there. Thanks
so much for including us today. This has been really fun.
Thanks. Good to have you all.